Economic Advisor, Government of India. Dr. Charan Singh, Chairman, ASSOCHAM National Council for Banking. Sri Rishi Gupta, Co-Chairman, ASSOCHAM National Council for Banking. Sri Indranil Sen Gupta, Chief Economist, Bank of America Merrill Lynch. Ms. Upasana Bhardwaj, Senior Economist, Vice Chairman, Kotak Bank. Sri Abhik Barwaji, Chief Economist and Executive Vice President, HDFC Bank. Sri Siddharth Sanyal, Chief Economist and Head of Research, Bandhan Bank. Today, it is shadow meeting, monetary policy meeting, and if we talk
Subhas sir, can you please unmute yourself?
I am speaking last. Okay. Sorry. Dr. Arvind Varmani ji, former Chief Economic Advisor, Government of India. Dr. Charan Singh, Chairman, ASSOCHAM National Council for Banking. Sri Rishi Gupta, Co-Chairman, ASSOCHAM National Council for Banking. Sri Indranil Sen Gupta, Chief Economist, Bank of American Merrill Lynch. Ms. Upasana Bhardwaj, Senior Economist and Vice Chairman, Kotak Bank. Sri Abhik Barua, Chief Economist and Executive Vice President, HDFC Bank. Sri Siddharth Sanyal, Chief Economist and Head of Research, Bandhan Bank. First of all, I would like to congratulate ASSOCHAM and Mr. Rajesh and Kusagra Joshi for organizing this bi-monthly second meeting of this shadow meeting, shadow monetary policy. So, and I am obliged that they have given me the opportunity to deliver welcome address. First of all, I would like to welcome everyone on the panelists as well as audience. So, if we talk about the economy, Chief Economic Advisor KV Subramaniam said, overall impact of second COVID wave on economy not likely to be large. And if we see the GDP of the fourth quarter this year, it is 1.6%. And overall, this financial year 2021 is shrink by 7.3%, which is better than what we have estimated, around 8% contraction. So, if we talk about MPC made, I think it should be accommodative stance to continue. RBI will ensure adequate system in liquidity. So, second wave rendered 1 crore Indian jobless. 97% household income declined in pandemic, as per the report of PMIE. As per the RBI report, non-food bank credit grows at 5.7% in April, as per RBI data. Demand pushed up of construction and manufacturing sector in Q4 financial year 21. Retail inflation for industrial worker eases to 5.14% for April compared to 5.64% in March 2021. If we see the barometer of the economy, GST in the last previous month were around 1.41 trillion rupees. So consequently, 7 months we are above 1 trillion rupees. So these are the signs of the economy, good barometer of the economy activity. And many short-term indicators are auto sales, electricity consumption, highway toll collection. So these are all better. So if we talk about RBI annual report released recently made it clear that the conduct of monetary policy in 2021-22 would be guided by evolving macroeconomic conditions with a bias to remain supportive of growth till it gains traction on a durable basis while ensuring that inflation remains within the target. The report added that the central bank would ensure that system level liquidity remained comfortable during 21-22 in alignment with the stance of monetary policy. The government has retained the inflation target at 4% with the lower and the upper tolerance band of 2% and 6% respectively for the next 5 years. RBI will ensure ample credit flow to the rural economy, setting up a special window for rural focused, smaller NBFC will help immensely. The central bank should consider enhancing or relaxing the exposure limit of banks to NBFC, particularly smaller ones. Given that the economy is not yet opened up fully and the uncertainty around vaccination is still continuing, RBI should keep the interest rate unchanged. If RBI maintain status quo in the key rate, it would be the sixth time in a row that the central bank kept the policy rate unchanged. The RBI had last revised its policy rate on May 22, 2020 in an off-policy cycle to perk up the demand by cutting the interest rate to a historic low. RBI to do survey on COVID impact on small scale industries, which they have mandated to several banks on their behalf to find the most affected sector due to this second wave. It has been seen that borrowers who have taken moratorium or availed restructuring during the first wave are the ones which are facing trouble even now. The Finance Ministry is working on a stimulus package for sectors worst affected by the pandemic. Retailers, restaurant operators, malls, hotels, and various other SMEs are worst affected in both the wave and brought many of them at the brink of collapse as various states are still in lockdown. Retail Association of India said 80% of stores nationwide are currently closed. As a result, RAI estimates that that retailers are invested about rupees 2,50,000 crore in the sector, and more than one third of it, or rupees 75,000 crore, could see the risk of turning into NPAs for banks in the event no government stimulus package to them. Similarly, National Restaurant Association of India said and demanded formal banking sector liquidity support and policy support, restoration of input tax credit on GST. The 20% loan top up has already been exhausted, and more liquidity support in the form of that without much collateral, real moratorium, and lower interest rate. The RBI had pushed the banks to quickly implement the measures announced by RBI. RBI recently introduced a recast scheme for borrowers with loan up to 25 crore and ensured that sufficient credit reaches to borrowers and SMEs. I once again thanks to all the speaker and the audience listening to me and will sitting here to listen other speakers. I hope you will be beneficial a lot because it is an excellent eminent speakers is going to speak before you. Thank you very much for giving me the chance. Thank you.
I think with this, we invite Dr. Arvind Virmani to chair the session.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Agarwal and Dr. Charan Singh. Let me just point to one thing where I think there's widespread agreement, the point made by Mr. Agarwal, which is on, the contact services, like he mentioned the data of 80% of stores closed, whatever the exact number, clearly the position of, as we have been pointing out, I and many others, both at the RBI and elsewhere, that the attention needed to shift to this. The second wave has just made it worse. The second wave restrictions, lockdowns, whatever you want to call it. So clearly, the issues of moratorium and credit guarantees by the government need to be looked at. Let me now move on to, I don't know, I would go by the list, except that I don't have it in front. It's one of the problems of the web. there's so many different files that I don't know which one this has it. Who is listed as we had a list of speakers, which I got, but I don't know. 1 second.
Yes, sir. Dr. Vermani, this is Rishi Gupta from
Yeah, yeah.
co-chair and MD.
Yeah, go ahead. Go
Yeah,
ahead. Yeah.
I'll probably ease your concern on that, but
Yeah, sure.
good afternoon to all my esteemed panel members. These are difficult times. I think personally, I believe RBI has transformed from being just a central banker and managing inflation and money supply to also now reaching out to various COVID-related resolutions, especially on lending entities and MSMEs and marginal sector. We saw RBI coming out with guidelines around KYC and pushing digital. If Vermani Saab remembers last time in the MPC committee, SOCM, we had discussed a lot about digital. I think that is something which RBI has really taken into one of their areas of focus, and including the PPI and other payment instruments. They have relaxed the guidelines to ease the consumer pressure or the consumer challenges which are there. So first of all, a lot of credit goes to RBI on account of that. I think the economic indicators, what we see in the last couple of months post the second COVID wave, has impacted the MSME sector in a very, very big way. And Dr. Agarwal very aptly covered the impact on the MSME and the contact services which are there. So without getting into the details of that again, I would say that is something which is of real importance and focus, which we should be looking at. I think banks have to play a bigger role. For the first time, I think after we saw ICICI Bank and SBI grow their retail portfolio by more than 16% as such. But on the corporate side, and we heard the commentary coming out from SBI, there is lack of utilization on the working capital cycle, and because of which the corporate credit has gone down. So that is an area I think we need to focus a little bit more in terms of how do we bring the industries back and they can take the corporate loans while retail loans are growing. And Agarwal Saab also covered the credit aspect of the entire conversation. I think structurally, I feel India's manufacturing and economic position is not that bad. I think once the normalization happens, the potential to grow again will be very, very, very good. For that to happen, I think the free movement of goods and people are critical and very important as such. And we need to pump in more money into the MSME and the contact services and the other services so that fair transmissions can go forward. For me, sir, what I look forward in this MPC is maintaining the status quo with accommodative stance, and we need to push for growth in the coming months, very similar to what I had said in the last meeting also. And I think the inflation is one worry which is there, which we need to look at, CPI crossing more than 10%. But I think that will also come down once the output and the productivity starts to growing. But looking at the inflation, I still feel, but the growth seems to be a very important aspect right now. So I would push for growth and output and request for an accommodative stance from the MPC, sir. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. Before I start the formal meeting of the Shadow MPC, I usually give a kind of overview, but I want to actually avoid doing that for a particular reason. I think, you know, given the huge uncertainties, and we've just had I believe, another shock, which has, you know, the uncertainty was coming down gradually till about mid-February. And our analysis of the second wave shows that the second wave took off between middle of February to mid-March with a series of Maharashtra and Punjab were among the first, and then it's kind of spread to other states. Clearly, the second wave has been another shock to the system, but the way I look at it is an increase in uncertainty. So one of the implications is that the range of forecasts has expanded. You know, we know that over the last year, the forecast had converged over time, and then given the shock, they've expanded again. So I have, of course, a view, I don't want to be very precise and preempted, so I'll just give a general observation, and then maybe at the end, if necessary, I will give you my specific views on the various aspects, because I don't want to put a damper on the different sets of views, because we need to have all of them to make an informed judgment. So let me start by pointing out that the FY21 GDP has come out exactly within our forecast range. From roughly 9 months to a year ago, we at EGRO have been saying that the growth rate for FY21, which has ended in March, would be -5% plus -2.5%. And this is very important. Note the 2.5, which meant -7.5 all the way up. So the way I look at shocks is in terms of uncertainty. This is the contribution I think is very important for economists to convey to the public and to politicians. So, and even when the initial, what's it called, the February estimates, advance estimate came out, I had said I'll stick to my forecast. They had given -7.6 or thereabouts. I said I'm confident that this is going to be less than -7.5, which is exactly what has happened. Now, why I'm emphasizing it is very relevant for looking forward. Now, when I made my initial FY22 estimate, I put a range of 10% to 1%, plus minus 1%, because in some sense, I also made this one mistake that uncertainty would go down rapidly. In hindsight, I should have put it as plus minus 1.5%. I think my judgment on 10% remains as the median or the median forecast. But I would say at this point, and this is what I said at the RBI governors meeting with economists, that if I had been more careful, I think I let my hopes get away with my rational judgment. I would have put it at 1.5%. So I would like you all to think of it that. And within this, there are a lot of ranges. So I am by nature optimistic, but I do not want to preempt. I've heard some of those are MPC members who are going to speak, and I want them to give whatever is their genuine view, and obviously backed by whatever they are observing. So having said that, very briefly, my overview. So we have looked at, and this is going to be out in the EGRO, the details of what thing, and as I said, I may add to it at the end. But what we do is we look at lockdown economics, which we have been talking about for the last 12 months, and how that differs between the first and second wave, and reapply our analysis of essential goods on one side, manufacturing, mining, construction, and contact services, and then on unemployment situation that has some insights, the income and wealth effects which are there, and there are some new skilled labor effects, the supply chain disruptions which we have been talking about for 9 months. Actually, let me just mention that a little more detail. We are seeing this widely now across the world. I had started by saying, talking about India. Some of you may recall from my earlier, from the shadow monetary policy meetings, but these have disrupted the whole world in terms of inflation. So in making inflation judgments, it's very important to keep this in mind. As I said, I want people to give what they have noticed. Maybe I'll add some things which I think they have missed. And then, as I said, I conclude, and I'll come back if necessary to the monetary part is actually pretty clear. But I'm sure you'll find that everybody is more or less on the same page on that, including the RBI. And the fiscal policy, where again I may differ. I'll come back at the end. With that, let me turn to our first speaker, which is, I think, Upasana, as usual. I think you go first.
Thank you, Dr. Virmani. I think, yes, you aptly put it. There is too much uncertainty, which we have been facing with over the course of last 1.5 years. And that is exactly the reason why the forecast errors, from the pointed numbers that we've been at times giving have been obviously way off. So correctly, we should stick to a range, and that probably defines our projections much more, it gives scope for whichever side of uncertainty we could be biased towards. So we are looking at the GDP number of 9%, but I would go with you to an extent saying that it's like a plus minus 100 basis from here. So about 8 to 10% is a broad range I would stick to, largely because last year we were quite surprised with the kind of ramp up in demand that happened in the second quarter, which this time around there is a little bit of uncertainty with regard to that. So whether we will witness that kind of a revival in demand once the restrictions ease, we have to yet see, because last time when things improved, we were not ready for a second or a third wave. We didn't think of it that it could hit us again. This time around, we're already talking about a possible third wave, which could be hitting us around. So the restrictions, when they get eased, they will be very gradual from the state side. And hence, my fear is that a very sharp revival, so a double-digit growth, will likely not happen in real terms. That is one thing. But in nominal terms, I mean, there's a stark contrast, we could say, because let's say beginning of the year, the government assumed a 14.5% growth during the budget estimates. But that time, it was also the time when we were not looking at input prices surge the way they have. So overall, the GDP deflator will likely be moving around 6.5% or so, which is more skewed towards WPI. So to that extent, the nominal GDP growth could still be around 15.5%, 16%, depending on how inflation really pans out. So from a growth perspective, clearly Q1 is looking quite weak. The unemployment rates, particularly the urban unemployment rate, if we look at, it's closer to 18% currently, as against, let's say, about 9.8% in April, and to nearly pre-COVID levels, around 8% even prior to that. So clearly there's been a huge increase. Now, these numbers were closer to, if I was to compare them to last year, April-May period, obviously they were in about 26, 27%. So that's the high we had seen. But clearly this year, it's not as bad as last year. So the situation still looks bad. I think unemployment rate overall at 12% gives us much more reasons to be a little skeptical on the revival of consumption demand going ahead. That's where my biggest worry is, that last year, the pent-up demand that we saw, will it really revive? That's where I will have to be really watchful for as we go ahead. That's my worry. On the inflation side, again, I would say that there remains, this is one of those times when, of course, worldwide, so this is not just an India phenomena, there is one of the, this is the time when we've seen the widest gap between the input and the output prices. So the input prices have been escalating like anything. And because of lack of pricing power for now, we haven't really seen that pass through to output prices as much. So for now, for example, we've had double digits WPI now, and this is probably going to go even higher in the subsequent readings. One or two readings may be higher before we see a top. We are looking possibly at a reasonable pass-through have happened in the WPI index of the global commodity prices. But the pass-through in CPI, of course, comes with a significant lag, and it's not as much, purely by the construct of CPI. The way it is in terms of imported commodity goods inflation, just about 20% weightage in CPI. So there is a divergence, and the construct of CPI and WPI, which will keep RBI free of the worry from WPI pass through to CPI. So growth is a problem. We don't know which way it's headed again. And to that extent, CPI inflation for now looks comfortable within 6%. So 4 to 6% band, it remains until the next 9-10 months that we are talking about. If that is the case, then RBI does have leeway to kind of focus more on growth. So the prioritization of growth remains intact, not just in this coming policy, but I think even in the subsequent 1 or 2 more policies, they will have to retain the stance to ensure that there is comfort within the system in order to avoid any disruption of any further incremental disruption of demand. So we are looking at accommodative stance for sure. rates remaining unchanged. Repo rate clearly remains unchanged through the course of the year. I don't see that change at all. The only question would be at some point as we approach October to December time, how will RBI look at inflation, which is appearing to be closer to 5.5% towards the end of the year. So if I look at my projections for around March, that last quarter of this financial year, that is where I see a range on an average around 5.4, 5.5%. So it's somewhere in that range. And that's where we will have to be cautious as to how RBI will have to, tread that balancing act between inflation and growth. So of course, but before that, the near-term problem is addressing growth. And focus has to be on maintaining accommodative stance. So that is where I believe clearly RBI will have no option but to focus on that. Now, just to one more point, I would say is at this point, what incrementally RBI can do is from the previous policy, whatever they have really announced till now, because the guidance has to be dovish, softer on growth and inflation incrementally is not a worry. So to that extent, what is the new problem from avoiding a transmission towards tightening of rates is where the bond market jitteriness is coming about. So growth is becoming weaker. There is somewhere uncertainty that fiscals could go awry. And if that is the case, then there is a risk of a supply, which we don't see today. However, there is a big GST compensation cess shortfall, which the center is providing for. So that in itself is 1.5 lakh crore of extra supply. Now that in this environment, an add-on supply, which is coming for the bonds, is something which the RBI will have to address by easing and providing assurance to the market. So the GSAP program, which was introduced in the previous policy, needs to be expanded. That's what my sense is. So while the governor had already said that there is more coming, but it is now where we stand, it is not just 1 lakh crore of GSAP 2 that we're talking about. It should be closer to 1.5 lakh crore of GSAP 2. So we need is a much more greater assurance from RBI to probably calm the markets so that we don't really see any excess tightness coming into the system, at least for the next 3 months. So the RBI will have to sound it off accordingly. That's what I'm looking at, incrementally a greater quantum of GSAP coming into for the next quarter. So you're on mute.
Okay. Yeah. So thanks. Yeah. So that's good. You've laid out your views fairly clearly and also given us some micro, which I'm sure others will give, that GSAP really, given that, almost everybody is talking about a hold and steady as it goes, it's the micro part which will actually probably be the interesting part in the monetary policy. Is Abhik there? I think we have gaps. Is Abhik? Abhik was not sure whether he'll come. Sharon, do you know if he's come? He had some meeting.
Yeah, he was in an overseas meeting.
Okay.
I can't see him. I sent him a message
Right.
also.
So
we could move on to Siddharth Sanyal.
Yeah. I know. So in that case, I'd like to welcome Mr. Dr. Siddharth Sanyal from Bandhan Bank, economist for Bandhan Bank, who is joining us for the first time, I guess as a guest member of the Shadow Monetary Policy Committee for today at least. And of course, I hear him, at every RBI governor's meeting. He's been there for quite some time. And I'm happy to have you join us because you bring, I don't always agree with you, as you might know from our meetings with RBI governor, but I always find it useful and interesting to have your kind of rural on the ground MFI perspective. So please, Mr. Sanyal.
Thank you very much, Dr. Virmani. Thank you, Dr. Charan Singh. Thank you, SHM, and thanks to this particular platform. Very happy to be here. This is the first time for me in this particular forum, and I was thoroughly enjoying the discussion that was going on. And now take this opportunity to add a little bit perspective from my side as I see things. Of course, yesterday we got a bit of a cheer from the Q4 GDP number, which came in, which sprang some positive surprise. But I'm right now not necessarily very optimistic about the growth momentum in subsequent quarters. Very clearly, even though the second wave had started from at some point of time towards late February or March, it really came into full bloom in April and May. Bulk of the first quarter will be washed off. Now, first quarter in the previous year was a dramatically low number, a big negative number. That's why there was very clear expectation of a very, very strong number in this particular year. For example, we had an expectation of plus 23% GDP growth in Q1 of FY22, about when we are projecting it about a couple of months back. And eventually, with the course of the development, we have scaled that particular number down to 14% positive growth as of now. Now, as and when it comes, it might still appear a fantastic number. A 14% number after a few negative prints, quarterly prints, etc., might appear fantastic. By the way, our forecast for the full year FY22 is possibly a little more conservative compared to what has been discussed so far in the meeting as of now. We are somewhere in the range of 7.5% to 8% at the moment. And I'll try to lay down the reasons why we are slightly more conservative or feel less optimistic about the pace of recovery going ahead in subsequent quarters. I tend to focus I mean, this is one particular indicator. This is which is possibly in focus for most of us, but still, I think it's worth discussing it a bit. The RBI's consumer confidence survey. This is an urban consumer confidence survey, spans about 5,000 odd customers across 13 cities, etc. Now, given that going ahead expectation of a very sharp recovery in net exports or investment is not so bright at this moment, the pace at which consumption recovers going ahead over the course of the next few quarters possibly remains extremely important to decide the course of recovery in overall economy. Now, if we take a step back and see what has happened to consumer confidence last year around this time. In the month of March, consumer confidence, which was the index that the RBI constitute and publishes, the RBI's index, which was around 86 in the month of March 2020, in the next about 3 to 4 months, fell to about 54 odd. That's about 30 points fall in a course of just 3 to 4 months when the COVID first wave hit us. And we need to take into account this was a period when RBI was easing aggressively. The government was announcing a series of measures. However, the degree of unpreparedness was sky high. Now, at this moment, as we see from March 2021 onwards, now we get to see the impact of the second wave in terms of the spread of the disease and mortality, etc., had been much higher. But we are banking on one particular point, that is the degree of preparedness, possibly the degree of preparedness of every entity, starting from businesses, policymakers, administration, or even human bodies, all are significantly better. So possibly we will not see so much of damage to consumer confidence now, but the consumer confidence, which is today at around 53, 54 kind of a level, I see the path, the grind higher from this point onwards will be very, very slow. And as Dr. Virmani also mentioned earlier, and as Upasana also mentioned earlier, that given that we have faced a second wave, at the back of the mind of the consumers, the possibility of a third wave or fourth wave will be very hard to negate for a fairly long period of time. Net, we are thinking the pace of recovery, which we were anticipating in the private final consumption expenditure block, even if we don't change the other other constituents in the C plus I plus G framework, if I don't change the other constituents, the C part, which is about 2/3 of the Indian economy, will possibly have a much slower pace of recovery than what we were anticipating 2 to 3 months back. Now, the other important point here, and this is where I get to see some first-hand information every now and then from my current engagement, that this time the impact in case of interior places, rural places is very significant. And if that is the case, if we have the kind of dent in consumer confidence we had seen last year, that was driven more by the urban centers, possibly. Rural centers started coming back into some kind of basic functionality relatively faster. But this time, it might actually take slightly longer, or the dent can actually be more damaging for a significantly long period of time. So we remain very, very conservative in terms of our assumption about the recovery of private consumption growth. And that's why the overall growth number that we are having is relatively conservative. Now, if I come to what the RBI or the MPC might do in this particular policy, the big change obviously is that from after the June 2020 policy, this particular, I mean, all other policies had been very similar in nature. The macro backdrop had been very similar in nature. Growth had been surprising on the higher side, and inflation was not, prospectively, was not too much of a botheration. But right now, 2-3 things have happened. At this juncture, we are seeing a situation where there has been fresh doubts about growth recovery. At the same time, at least the inflation prints, even if you know that the domestic demand part is extremely weak at this moment, there is not much you can do with monetary policy in terms of controlling inflation. The print will keep bothering us, and we need to, I believe the MPC needs to take that in its stride and try to live in a situation that this particular phase of inflation we need to look through. We need to keep supporting the economy. Supporting means it's very difficult to think about supporting the economy in terms of conventional tools, but the RBI had been forthcoming and proactive in terms of thinking about unconventional monetary policy tools. And our sense is that they will continue to do some of that. For example, all the ECLGS or GSAP, all these things will all stay on the table. And it might be the case that we might get to see something more also, which we don't have much of a clue at this juncture. So we continue to expect a very strong statement in terms of endorsing the accommodative statement for a very significantly long period of time, so that the uncertainty on the part of market and industry remains relatively less, especially given the fact that going ahead soon we might see a situation where inflation, if inflation, not inflationary pressures, at least the inflation prints will keep bothering us. We very clearly do expect that the numbers will, off and on will be beyond the RBI's tolerance band, and occasionally can be significantly higher than that. But despite that, RBI cannot stay away from supporting the economy. The last point I would like to mention here, one particular aspect where RBI deserves special words of praise in the last several months, that even when there had been significant upside pressure from fiscal spending announced in the last budget, or there had been expectation of growth recovery as well as relatively not so low inflation, etc., in the last few months, there had been expectations building up that interest rate spectrum in general will start seeing some upward pressure. The RBI has done very well in terms of managing some of the headline numbers so far as the interest rate spectrum is concerned. But one particular point for the MPC that I think remains very relevant, whatever initiative the RBI has taken so far, the benefit has been possibly more concentrated in the headline segment or the benchmark segment or the 10-year segment. Across the board benefit to the yield curve had not been that strong. My sense is that going ahead, if it's not necessarily the MPC's baby, but in general, if the RBI keeps focusing a little more on the broader spectrum of the yield curve, that might actually lead to better, greater benefit for the overall credit market, etc. And I look forward to that. I'll stop here so far as my opening comments are concerned. Later on, if there are questions, happy to take them.
Thank you. Dr. Charan Singh?
I must start with the discussion that I used to have with Dr. Virmani when we were trying at the IGRO to fix what would be the growth rate for the year as a whole. He was far more optimistic than me, and he said the story that he mentioned, he was weighing in his mind whether 2.5, and given his vast experience and expertise, he turns out to be correct. I was a little more optimistic, and I was thinking we'll cover up in the days to come. Of course, that didn't happen. Now, as far as the current situation is concerned, I would like to say I agree with the sentiments expressed by Upasana as well as Siddharth. My own worry is that the second wave which has come in as a big shock. The unprecedented 4x, as Dr. Virmani has measured, or the Spanish flu of 1918, where the second wave was 5x, and so it's far more lethal, far more deadly, and it shows it on the economy. The impact of the second wave, which though peaked in May, but April, May, and June in some are lost. So therefore, I feel that the growth projections, and this is exactly where I totally agree with Dr. Virmani, that the uncertainty that has come in the current year is absolutely unmeasurable. More so now, given that today Maharashtra has reported the beginning of the third wave with the number of children in one single district suffering from COVID. Now, the country is expecting in about 20 to 30 weeks the setting in of the third wave. Now, the issue that I'm worried is the second wave entered the hinterlands of the country and rural population has been impacted. The third wave is expected again to be impacting both urban and rural areas. If the third wave is going to play sometimes around September to November when it is expected, then the uncertainty increases far more large because that is the busy season when lots of growth activities are taking place in the country post monsoon and when lots of manufacturing activity, construction activity takes place. So the uncertainty is extremely large. Now, the issue that has been discussed on the WPI, which went into 2 digits, I would like to mention, and there's been a discussion already, not on our platform today, but otherwise, that this need not be a long-term phenomena and should not turn out to be a major threshold for the discussions in policy at the RBI. I totally endorse that view. But if we look at the data of WPI, of the CPI, food and non-food, you would agree with me that things are okay. Yes, as the previous panelist mentioned, they're in the range of 4 to 6, but I think that is where it would be. Now, when I look at the data on manufacturing, especially the index of industrial production, one good thing I see, and the conclusion I draw from that, the good thing that I see, that the performance in manufacturing as city and of course mining, vis-a-vis a year earlier, the performance is better despite what happened in the last year and despite the uncertainty associated with the pandemic. The point I'm trying to make is the industry is waiting for a letter. And even if we have small windows of opening up, the lockdown either eases or opens up, the manufacturing sector, mining and electricity are going to boom up. So therefore, my feeling is that manufacturing and electricity and mining will improve in the current year. The monsoon is predicted to be normal, and therefore agriculture sector should continue on its normal way. So that is something which is very positive here. The core industries, the 8 core industries performance has also been reasonably okay in recent months. But yes, because of the second and third wave, there may be some dent there. So now I want to cover with you some banking aspects. As far as the RBI's annual report is concerned, and Mr. Subhash Agarwal in his opening remarks did cover the annual report, I would like to mention and highlight a few points. The provision coverage ratio is much higher for the period ending March. It's nearly 88% from 81% earlier. The capital to risk weighted ratio has risen to 15.9% from 14.8%, which is very positive. Of course, the credit offtake is low, and therefore investment in GSACs has almost doubled than a year ago. It's gone up to 20% from nearly 10% a year ago. The return on assets is positive, vis-a-vis negative in the previous year closing, but all the results of the banks have yet not come in. And the regulatory accommodative stance that the RBI had towards the banking industry, we need to really look at the real position once that is taken. So maybe we'll have a different picture in times to come. But as it stands now, the banking sector is pretty much in control, and things are not as deteriorated as one would have worried. Looking ahead, with the second wave in the very first quarter, April to June, there is a fear because credit offtake would not have taken place again. The slowdown in the economy, basically because of the lockdown, could impact the balance sheet, the quarterly results, April to June. So the Reserve Bank probably will have to go in for provisioning and accommodative stance, continue with its policies where it has accommodated the commercial banks in the previous year. If the third wave hits, and if the third wave hits in the busy season, I think the Reserve Bank's role will have to be far more aggressive and probably again take care of the banking sector. I would now like to conclude by the following two observations. The fiscal situation in the country, because of the lockdown and the situation accommodative policies that have to be announced to take care of various sectors, I think the fiscal will be under stress. Maybe the time has come to borrow more aggressively, and I think Madam Upasana was referring to that, maybe to borrow more aggressively from the market that can have interest rate implication, or go for monetized deficit. It's a challenge, but I think the Fiscal Responsibility Budget Management Act can be given a pause, which does not permit monetization of deficit. The second point that I want to make and close, I think the Reserve Bank, and I think there I agree with everybody on the panel so far, the Reserve Bank should continue its accommodative policy. Now, the point in this, I would like to again attract your attention, and I know I will be in minority here. The rates of interest which are there in the advanced countries today, the US Federal Reserve continues to be near zero. UK bank rate is around 0.1. Euro is 0. Australia cash rate is 0.1. New Zealand is 0.25. I understand that the inflation in these countries are also very low. I would still feel to convey the message, on one hand, where the Reserve Bank has been very accommodative to the banking sector. On NBFCs, we'll have Raman Agarwal speak, and that is one aspect where also there has been some accommodation and tweaking in the policy in the right direction. The MFIs are suffering a severe blow. 40% of the credit there could turn out to be NPAs, and that is worrisome. That is the RBI taking care of those things. On the growth aspects, it would be very useful if RBI is able to signal, yes, inflation is a concern, the government has given its mandate, but we are understanding the investment scenario, and therefore a little tweaking of the interest rate by 25 basis points right in the beginning of the year when things are on the verge of the third wave. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. before I open it up to outsiders, I just want to, I'm not going to give up, as I mentioned earlier, we will have this on our website if somebody is really technically interested. I just want to point out a few facts which I think have not been mentioned. It's going to be a little random because I'm going to read, I haven't noted them down. So let me just start. Well, let me start backwards in a way. The first point I would make from my optimistic side is that the majority opinion is going to be surprised by the upside in the Q2. That is my view. There's little really to differentiate what will happen to Q1 because that stuff is already baked in. I mean, we can have a difference in judgment because of lack of data, but I don't think the overall effect of the second wave on Q1 is much to argue on. Where I think I have a fundamental difference with, I would say 90% of analysts that I've heard, is that the second, as I said, the recovery and this confidence of mine starts from my analysis of the second wave. Just very briefly for those, we did a paper on the second COVID wave where we showed that it's really the mutations and their what is called transmissibility and severity, which we measured by an index which came from the model. So we have what we call a dual S-curve model. We estimated that model for the new variant and can project what is going to happen. And we've done that. And it's in a eGROW paper. And the key point there was that the nature of the second wave is that it is much faster and severe in rising, but will be equally fast in plateauing it out. It's a key inside of the S-curve model. Now, there is always an uncertainty, and I give that. We are a professional, we give you research. So what I have said is when I look at the actual projection and compare it with where the data is, I suspect that the model, not me, is underestimating the final position by 10%. But it's only in terms of the severity. The speed and form of the plateau is exactly the same. And we have done this for 21 states, okay? In every state, virtually, it's the same pattern and national. So that is one reason why I believe that people are overestimating pessimism because the first wave was stretched out much longer. This is going to end very, very rapidly, and it's going to surprise lots of people. Okay, now that's fine, but we are talking economics, not the wave. But let me give you a few pointers which have not come up. One is again from our research. Actually, if somebody is really interested in research, I would, even if you don't read it, tell people to read our research. It's really, if I am praising it myself, it's really fantastic. One of the things we pointed out earlier was the supply chain disruptions and their effect on inflation. Okay, worldwide, if you look now, the same framework is being applied in US, in Asia, in America, and they are all concluding, just as our paper did, that this is going to be temporary. I'm not trying to convince anybody. I'm just bringing to your notice some very important things which have flowed from our research. So what is the reason? Because they are not due to permanent factors. Because, whether it is commodities or it is semiconductor supply chains, there are disruptions. But as we pointed out earlier, the disruptions are not only in supply chain, they are also on the demand side. And if those of you who were present here last time will remember what I told you, I gave you an example which comes from the US where we have that information, that people who, because of fears or because of restrictions are not going and consuming the amount of services they would. Remember, there were very few restrictions across USA. If you take the USA as a whole, there's no lockdown. People are choosing, okay? So what they were choosing to do is to reduce the amount of service consumption voluntarily because they are afraid to go out there, and increasing commodities. And I gave you the example of this huge surge in commodity imports through Chicago, which I was familiar with, where huge backlogs emerged. Point of it being that these disruptions, once things normalize, are going to disappear very quickly. And what I want to point out is just not my conclusion. This is now what they are concluding for the US also. Again, you don't have to agree with that, obviously, but this is something which one has to keep in mind. One or two other points. I think it's very valid point about consumer surveys. In fact, after this, I'm going to go and look at the consumer surveys, and I like to look at the whole trend because these numbers really don't mean much, as you know. They really, I've never been able to link them directly to any forecast of consumption, but I think the trend is important. So there are clear negative factors. I think again, a lot of people are basing the forecast on these negative aspects of consumption. Okay, but here are two. One point I've already made is that these contagion fears. You'll be surprised that one of my relatives got into a lift and found a person. This was before the second wave. The guy was not wearing a mask, and she asked him, "What the heck are you doing? Why don't you put on your mask before I come into the lift?" And he said, "नहीं, ये सब बकवास है, हमारा सारे विलेज में ठीक है, कुछ नहीं है, it's a government conspiracy." Okay. The funny thing is that there are still such people. I just heard from National Capital Region, I think, what is it, Gurgaon or somewhere, that people like that are still saying this. Okay. So what's the point of it? Not these people. But a lot of people are going to be strongly, the kind of people we are talking about, the middle class, which has been affected by the disease and death, quite obvious, rightly. I mean, they are scared to spend the money which they may need. But those are going to be hugely, their expectations are going to change because of the vaccination. Vaccination is not. Please remember that a year ago, there was no vaccine. People who have not been following, I have been following day to day. There was hundreds of people saying, we don't know whether the vaccine will come next year. And the most optimistic in the beginning were 2 years, end of 2 years. Okay. We now have a vaccine. Okay. It's just a management problem. It is not an uncertainty about whether there will be a vaccine at all. That was the uncertainty then. So I just want, as I said, I'm not trying to convince, but the point is that there are certain positive factors. There at that point, 99% of people kept adjusting their forecast downwards. It's no longer 2. Even if you take arithmetical, from minus 23 to earlier, as you quite rightly pointed out, 25%, even if you say half of that, 13, 14, it still will be an uptrend. Okay. So as you all know, the economists know, expectations of future income play a very important role in savings and consumption decisions, besides the precautionary motive, which everybody is focusing on. So these are kind of the two or three reasons why I believe that a lot of forecasts are going to be surprised on the Q2, not the Q1. Q1, I think, I wouldn't at this point bet on a particular number, whether it's 14 or 20 or whatever. Yes, all these are possible. But these are the two reasons why I think people are missing out. And finally, on the monetary, as I think everybody is agreed, hold is the best thing, with some, I think, minor, or not call it minor necessarily, they can be very important for individual sectors. Credit was mentioned, credit for contact services, shops was mentioned, etc. There are many other sectors, which in fact, I don't know if Sanyal remembers, but the first meeting, I think in January to RBI, I pointed out that please shift your focus to these sectors, because these are going to be a problem anyway for another 6 to 9 months. Of course, now with this second wave, they are going to be a problem for 12 months, just picking a number out of the air. So that is clear. But on the fiscal side, I think they are very, I think it's, besides the taking care of these sectors and ensuring they survive, I would reiterate 3 things which I said at the pre-budget meetings. One is accelerate construction, labor-intensive construction, job-creating construction, obviously related to infrastructure, because that's what government does. Second, give incentives for ventilation, air filters, UV lights. As I said, this contact service problem is going to be there. Why do I mention UV lights? Let me give you an example. Buildings have, most factories don't have air conditioning in India, so you need better ventilation. Many buildings now, offices, malls, other places have air conditioning, so you need better quality air filters. UV lights, that's the most puzzling. But in a pub, for example, or a small restaurant, we have thousands, lakhs of small restaurants. Very dangerous. You cannot have very good ventilation. Okay. So the best thing is what they've devised. It's a UV light which goes on the ceiling, which by convection kills the UV, the virus. So it's also safe because people are worried UV is very strong. Okay, won't it harm us? But they've invented a UV light which can be put on the ceiling so it doesn't affect the individuals, the humans. But when the air takes the virus up to convection, it kills it. Okay. So, and finally, I still believe rather than injecting more money into the system, of course, we have what I keep referring to, I think maybe it's a mistake, as automatic stabilizers, the decline in revenue due to decline in GDP, which is doing most of the fiscal work actually. If you look at the past and you look at what I dealt with in the financial crisis. But as far as expenditures are concerned, or on the positive side is concerned, I still feel a simplification and reform of the GST, of the direct tax code, a revenue neutral or revenue negative reform. But politicians don't seem to be interested in revenue negative. So revenue neutral is good enough. Will still be the biggest stimulant once we come, anywhere close to normalization, which in my view will happen in Q2. I mean, again, I accept there can be difference in views, but the policy implications, I think, actually don't matter that much, don't depend that much on the precise forecast. So with that, let me end the monetary policy meeting. And I think we have, as usual, we have an additional speaker, Charan.
Yes, we have NBFC's representative in terms of
Yeah.
Mr. Raman Agarwal, who has prepared his material and come to us with his presentation.
Sure. Please go ahead, Mr. Agarwal.
Thank you, Dr. Virmani. Thank you, Dr. Charan Singh, and thank you, SHM. A very enlightening discussion. Let me quickly present the NBFC's perspective. While the first wave was done, NBFC sector was really bouncing back. And if we look at the RBI's annual report, and we see that in fact there was an improvement in the gross NPAs from March 2020 to December 2020. That's a very strong case where the asset quality actually showed an improvement. And the things were really getting back to normal. In fact, going by the picture which we gauged from various players in the industry, we were almost on the verge of reaching pre-COVID levels, and just that when the second wave stuck and we saw this lockdowns happening. So with that, I'm now going to quickly touch upon few very interesting regulatory aspects, because every monetary policy is accompanied by a statement on the development and regulatory aspects. RBI has been focusing on one key aspect of harmonization of regulatory framework of NBFCs vis-a-vis the other players, banks and other financial institutions. Now, on that front, there are few very interesting aspects which need to be addressed too, because it cannot be a one-sided view of just tightening the regulation in terms of harmonizing. There are associated some kind of operational ease and conveniences. For example, we know that NBFCs are the only financial players in the Indian system today who are following Ind AS accounting system. No other entity, for all of them, it's been deferred, whether it's banks, whether it's insurance companies or anybody. So NBFCs are the only ones. And as a result, we are today faced with a very peculiar situation where we are asked to make provisions for the impaired or distressed assets as a higher of the two. That means provisions calculated based on the expected credit loss method under Ind AS, or versus provisions required for the NPAs as per the IGAAP norms. So RBI says you provide for higher of the two. It's a very peculiar situation. I think it has to be one, whether we follow Ind AS or we don't. So I think that is one glaring kind of a mismatch in the system or an anomaly which needs to be rectified. Similarly, there are few other aspects. For example, there is a central repository of large credits, the CRILIC, which RBI set up, where all entities are supposed to report exposures of 5 crores and above. Unfortunately, while it is mandated for NBFCs to report data to CRILIC, but NBFCs have been denied access to that data. I mean, it is absolutely strange that we are supposed to report and add to that data, but we don't have access to it when it comes to giving away our credit and seeking information from the CRILIC. So this is another example. Third example is that as a key financial player, and when we talk of harmonization, there has to be a lender of the last resort or some kind of a refinance mechanism which is not available to our NBFCs, and that is something which has been impacting especially a large number of small NBFCs, and we've been asking for that. Another example on that front is the KYC. Now, I don't know how many of us would be aware that if we pick up the presentation made by the Honorable Finance Minister dated 23rd August 2019, that is before, I'm talking of before the pandemic started, and we were witnessing a slowdown in the economy as part of the stimulus packages. There was a clear announcement made by the Honorable Finance Minister where NBFCs were allowed to use bank KYC, because the logic used was that whatever money transactions happen with the NBFC customers, whether they are depositors, investors, or the borrowers, the money flow happens through the KYC authenticated bank accounts. So there is no need for another duplicate KYC done by NBFCs. There was a clear instruction passed as part of the package announced by the finance minister, but unfortunately, because of this whole system, it has got somewhere lost out. So that is point which needs to be brought down. Finally, in this aspect, we are witnessing a point for where we see state after state announcing lockdowns, and in the list of exempted entities, we find banks, we find SEBI stockbrokers, we find mutual fund players, we find insurance companies, but not NBFCs. So again, it's a clear case of a glaring anomaly in the system, because if we are talking of harmonization, it has to be a complete harmonization. Now, I'll touch upon two quick, very important issues, which are really the pain points for the NBFC sector, apart from, of course, what has been much talked about. One, of course, is the RBI circular on the restriction on the opening of current accounts. Now, while that may be valid for non-financial entities and non-financial players, but for entities like NBFCs, where we have to do collections and countrywide, and we know some banks are, some of the local or the regional banks are strong in their own regions. So NBFCs do open multiple current accounts, which are the collection accounts, to ensure smooth and timely flow of money. But with the new circular in place, this is putting us, hampering the business gravely. So I think the request here is to clearly exempt entities like NBFCs from the provisions of this circular. It is greatly impacting the collections. And that would also be true for the MFIs, I would say so. Finally is, of course, the RBI guidelines on the appointment of statutory auditors. While, putting aside all the issues concerned, I think there is one simple request which we need to ensure, that while what RBI says as per the circular is that we need to change the auditor midway, that means in the second half, H2, the second half of this financial year, we need to change an auditor. So I think that is becoming a very peculiar situation, and going by the current situation, it would be better off if this implementation is at least put off till financial year 21-22 and not by 30th September 21. So I think that is one. Finally, I'll end by pointing out one, especially Dr. Virmani, I think there is one sector which has, I think, been left out when we talk of the stress sector and when we talk about coverage under the ECLGS, and that is the education sector. Unfortunately, education sector does not find mention in the list of 26 sectors identified with the Kamath Committee. And we see the education sector has been gravely impacted by the lockdown, both by the first wave and the second wave, because we know all educational institutions are running in the virtual mode, and there is a heavy dearth in the cash flows, and there is a very great stress in the system. I think there is a need, urgent need, to include education also in the list of stress sectors. Thank you.
Just for my information, I guess most educational institutions are kind of NGOs, right? They're really, or are you the technical education, which of course can be private, or both?
Right. Yes, it
Yeah.
could be both. Yeah, exactly.
So
exactly.
what did you kind of?
So what we are saying is, because many of them are our clients also, are our borrowers, are our borrowers also.
So these are the technical institutes, is it?
Yeah, but or even even some of the private schools, for example. No, a lot of private schools run by private entities. So
Okay,
they also
right. They're also coming for credit. I'm just trying to learn something.
yes.
Yeah.
Oh yes, sir. For their infrastructure, for building the infrastructure, for buying equipment, the technical equipment, etc.
Okay, I think that's a very useful point. That's why I wanted to be clear. Okay, good. Yeah. So we can open the floor to questions and answers. Charan, can you help me? I hope you're better because it's hard to keep track of the questions. If you can just
Sure, I'll do
see
that
who wants
happily.
to and
Sure, I'll do that happily. Just before we open it, I wanted to say, Mr. Raman, you know, the RBI has started the scale-based regulatory framework for NBFCs. That is one thing. After this meeting is over, I would request you to kindly put your points systematically, send it to us, and we are going to put it on website, but we send a link of our discussion as well as the salient features to the RBI, and maybe they'll be able to take cognizance of that. So that will be done.
Thank you.
But I also feel that, do you have any research based, because we're a policy oriented think tank, we like to make recommendations to the governor and the government which are research based. Do you have some solid research based paper on NBFCs?
No.
No. Okay, then that's okay. That's all. Okay. So we have Mr. Prem, who has requested that if we could give him some time to speak. Mr. Prem.
Can I speak, sir? Good afternoon to all panelists and
Yeah,
distinguished
I would simply request you, before
please.
the panel discussion today, the chairman was very clear, and we requested all members to be very focused and tell us points, tuck, so that we make the best of the limited time. I'm going to request you the
That's
same.
fine.
Please stay very focused and give us points. Basically, you could give us points with the Reserve Bank you want them to consider tomorrow, or maybe the fiscal authority has to consider, because we like policy-oriented research and recommendations. So please be very focused and straightforward. Thank you.
Okay. Right. Thank you very much. So my point is that basically we are talking of monetary policy, which is going to come 2 days after that. We always see it is always been debate between inflation and growth. My point is very simple here. When we are talking of the inflation, basically inflation is driven mostly, in my opinion, is many times is a supply driven where lack of supplies are there. So there is a see, like we talk of the commodity prices which have been increasing. It is basically, I don't think the monetary policy can alone control that thing. What we need to do is we increase our supply chain, we increase the production, and instead of overemphasis on monetary policy for controlling inflation, we should see that part. Point number one. The lowering of interest has tremendously boosted the growth part, which is in last COVID part and as of now also. And I expect that still there is a scope to lower the interest rate simply because this part of COVID wave 2 has been affecting each and everyone. So it is the effect is much more worse. So I still expect that there is a scope to reduce that to boost the demand. Second point is why I am telling you this is that this is worse is that because this time the rural economy has been affected very badly, and if you don't take care of the rural economy, and we don't give them the money, there is all the chances that the recovery will not be that fast, which has been in the last COVID. Third thing is, if we take out the investment data, the much investment is not coming, and if you have investment, you cannot use the supplies. So for that, the government need to pump in the fund. Government need to put a lot of funds in investment in infrastructure. That is my last submission. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody else would like to make any observation, comments, or anyone wants to give any other suggestion?
Me, sir, Charan, sir.
Yes.
I still feel that rate of interest needs to come down to boost the investment, to boost the demand.
Yes, I personally also feel that. That's why when I made my observations, I know I'll be in the minority in that, but I do feel to give a signal that at this juncture, so we take your point.
Thank you.
Mr. Narendran, would you like to make some observations and contribute?
Yeah. Of course, I had put two questions, but
Yes.
may not be the immediate policy as the next what we are getting the RBI policy. One is what may be the panelist view as far as when the RBI will reverse its accommodative stance and also start looking at the interest rate also, which is at the moment it is lowest and it may be needed for the revival of the Indian economy. That is the first question. And with the lowering of the interest rate, it has been now proved that the corporates are much better, and they are have been able to cover profit as well as borrowing at the lower rate. Whereas the small business or MSME, of course, individuals as far as the housing loan, they have got a lower rate, but that may be floating, they may be affected. But overall, the small borrowers or small business as well as MSME were given benefit by the government as far as the additional loan under the scheme, but the rate of interest were also around 9.5 that time. So overall, they have not been benefited. They are further in stress on account of the second COVID. So what will be the view by the panelists as far as the benefit passing on of this interest rate reduction, which all have said that it is needed for the revival to this section of the population, or what you call industry and activities? These two are my questions.
I leave it to the chairman to answer. Or
Yeah,
whom
no,
does he want?
perhaps I think Mr. Sanyal, Dr. Sanyal, you want to answer that? You would.
Yes, I can. I mean, I can give it a shot. Obviously, Dr. Virmani, you can take it up after that. So one particular point, I tried mentioning it while speaking in the initial time also, that at this moment the immediate effectiveness of interest rate looks relatively limited. It will not help in reducing inflation, or just a little lowering of interest rate will not really lead to any bump up in growth. So the role of unconventional monetary policy tool possibly remains much more important. Exactly the point you mentioned, so that channelizing the resources, whatever limited resources we have, channelizing to the bottom end of the pyramid, poorer households or MSMEs remain extremely important. It's heartening to see that the government had been doing some, the ECLGS or taking some of the other initiatives had been in the right direction, but possibly the second wave has actually necessitated that particular movement, or that, moving in the movement in that particular direction a lot more. On the interest rate front, I don't think there is any quick change anytime in the offing. But one particular point we also need to take into account, that globally, if you see, from a production point of view, two very important things are happening. On a long-term basis, it looks like inflation on a very long-term basis. If I take a 5-year, 10-year, 15-year, 20-year kind of a view, inflation seems to be on a downwards movement because of two things. One is, greater role of technology, which is reducing cost worldwide. And this is that kind of technology where if invented in Silicon Valley, can actually be available in the rural India also very soon. And so that way, technology and globalization of resource market is a big two factors which were not the case maybe 10, 20, 30 years back. That is something we should draw some inspiration and courage from. And that's why even when there is a little bit of blip on the higher side on the interest rates, inflation spectrum, we should see it more temporary in nature and not structural in nature. But on the other hand, if you see from a growth point of view, the threats are real, both in terms of the near term or also in terms of the medium term. I cannot really give a comparative picture of India vis-a-vis some of the other countries, but if I go by an IMF study which came out in April, it looks like the medium-term loss of GDP in case of India will be much more than some of the peers. So some of these factors we cannot be complacent about, even if some of the growth numbers, etc., are slightly higher. And to come back to the first part of your question, my sense is that we should take a very, very lenient view so far as thinking about reversing the interest rate spectrum anytime soon, even though it may not lead to any immediate effect. And for that, we might have to continue depending on unconventional tools. Sorry, it was a long answer.
Thank you.
That's very good.
Thank you,
That's
Sanyal.
exactly what we want. 1 second, I want Upasana ji to, if she wants to speak.
Yeah, so just a little add-on to what Siddharth has to say. A slightly different view, I would explain it in a slightly different way. So when we say policy normalization, we should differentiate that a little. So I would say, would repo rate change? I think we are far away from there. But where we stand today, there is, because of the pandemic, RBI has taken many more aggressive measures, which will have to normalize at some point in time. So that bit will correct, even though repo rate remains. So policy structure, when we are talking about, the repo rate has to become the operative rate back. That is something which will happen even before. So I think Siddharth, when he's mentioning, he's talking more from a policy perspective. So yes, structurally, technologically, we have seen disinflation globally bringing about. So we don't expect that kind of a sharp upsurge in rates. But that policy normalization from a reverse repo, wherein the operative rate right now is at 335 or below, has to shift towards closer to 4%. And that may happen, let's say, during the course of 12 months or so. But again, that will be, of course, subject to how growth pans out. So, the bottom line is there's uncertainty. We don't know how consumer demand is going to revive. It will be a function of vaccination pace. Once that takes place, how well we are picking up. And then the policy normalization, the excesses of the pandemic, which RBI has done, that has to be withdrawn. So I think that differentiation is important. And that is where I believe that maybe within 12 months down the line, we should see that excess liquidity slowly getting, not necessarily tightening too much. It's not called tightness really, but it's like getting normalized. We can't expect to have durable liquidity of 8 lakh crore for too long in the system. So that is something which I believe will normalize gradually.
Thanks.
I would like to add here.
Very well articulated and no difference on that particular part.
Thank you, Upasana.
I would like to add something. Going by the international experience, looking at the policies that have been announced by the UK, Euro, and the USA, all of them have been providing forward guidance and pretty conditional. They've been looking at the employment as well as growth and inflation. So if I have to do a comparative study, and India to a great extent is following a very synchronized policy, rightly so, and I see nothing wrong there, I feel that the economy has to recover, revive, the green shoots have to become visible, and only then, of course, the technical aspects, both the market chief economists have articulated it so well in terms of the liquidity and in terms of the measures which Mr. Siddharth Sanyal was mentioning. But as an economist, I would look at the green shoots before we start turning around the reversal. At the end of the day, we do need investment, and that will only come if there are green shoots available. When do I think as an economist that would happen? I can be wrong. Dr. Virmani is an expert on this, and I'm inviting each one of you to please read the paper which he was referring on the second wave. So rigorous and scientifically written that it adds to your value system. Now, the point that I'm trying to make is that if there has to be a recovery and revival, we have to be post third wave. After the post third wave, then one can see that there is some stability in the demand and labor supply. And then probably we would probably see, and as an economist, I would look at it sometimes in March, April 2022. That's the early
Okay, I just want to
think and plan.
Sorry, have you finished, Charan?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, so I want to put this in perspective. So again, we encourage difference of opinion. Charan has a different view from me. You shouldn't think that we have all uniform views. Because my assumption is that we are, everybody, including the authorities, are now have got enough of a slap in the face, if I may put it a little crudely, that they will do everything to prevent a third wave. So in some sense, I'm assuming that either there will be no third wave, or no is not a good word, but if it's like 1/10 or 1/20th of the first one, or even 1/3, I would count that as, proper preemptive action is being taken, because there could be a completely new mutation. I don't think with the current mutations we have that possibility, but given, whatever my understanding is after reading the literature, unless there's a new mutation that is even worse and escapes the vaccines, I really don't think it's going to happen. But yes, if Charan is right, and he is pretty clear, actually, he's been, I still remember when I wrote my earlier paper, which one was that, Charan? I've forgotten the exact one.
That's the
He warned me. He read the paper and said, "You have not mentioned the second wave." I said, "Absolutely right. I better go back and check the Spanish flu." And I checked it, and I put it into the conclusion that we must, and we didn't take any measures, of course, or rather we didn't take enough of them. Sorry, I don't mean that literally. So I wouldn't discount Charan's warning. It's a warning which everybody must, take seriously. But I still think that we have learned, it's like, what is that expression? Surprise me once, and I'm the, what is it? And you are the, you are to blame, and surprise me twice and I am the fool, or something of that nature. So if we are surprised the third time, that would really be very bad. Okay, so Charan, why don't you continue with the questions?
Yeah. So sir, I had a point which I had not mentioned to you. The problem I am facing is that the number of people in the country and the vaccines availability, there's a big mismatch. So by the time we cover our hinterlands, it will be quite a bit of time. The earliest that we can imagine to do would take 9 months, but if vaccines are not available, it could take 12 to 15 months. During this time, if people who have not been vaccinated come in contact, or this reaches them, this could be devastating. Going by the Spanish flu 1918 experience, the first, if I take it as X, the second wave was 5X, the third wave was 2X. Now, what Dr. Virmani is saying, that taking enough precautions, we might mitigate the third wave. But because we'll still not be vaccinated, and because there are still people, as Dr. Virmani was saying, who do not believe in basic manners of like distancing, putting this, and others who ridicule these medicines and all things. So therefore, I'm a little worried that we may mitigate it, but we may still have it. We'll have to see it. This is so uncertain a phase. We will have to see it. I'm so happy to mention that the Secretary General of ASSOCHAM has been quietly and silently listening to the whole discussion. And I wonder if he has any observation or comments to make. He represents the ASSOCHAM, and he may be getting far more inputs on industry, which he may like to bring to the forefront. Mr. Deepak Sood, would you like to make some observations or comments?
I would have loved to. I'm actually on a call.
Okay.
I've just muted the call. Dr. Virmani, thank you very much. I was there with you all the time that you did, and Mr. Sanyal also when you were saying. Uh, but I'll have to get back to that, Dr. Charan Singh. Thank you so much
Take
for
care.
this invitation. Great enlightening thoughts, and I'm sure we'll be able to go through this whole challenge of the economy that we are, the COVID challenge that we have in front of you. And I hope, Dr. Singh, you're feeling much better. I'm so delighted and happy that I'm seeing you moderate this and run this for us. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Sir, we have reached 4:30. I don't see any more questions in the chat box. If anyone wants to raise his hand and ask a question right away, we would welcome as a last question. Otherwise, then we would start the concluding of this discussion.
Right.
As I
So
see no
let me
one,
thank
so
all the members of the Shadow MPC who made it, and the other 3 or 4 speakers. And with that, let me hand it to whoever is going to conclude the meeting.
So I would like to thank Dr. Virmani for chairing the Shadow MPC for us, which we do, the Grow Shadow MPC, which we do in association with ASSOCHAM. I would also like to thank Dr. Rajesh, who has organized the whole thing so well and brought us together. I would like to thank my co-panelists who have brought in so much of fresh view into this whole discussion. And I welcome Mr. Siddharth Sanyal, who was my colleague at the RBI. And knowing his depth of knowledge, I invited him and I feel so richly rewarded by his contribution. I really would like to thank everyone. I would like to mention one thing during the discussion. I forgot to mention the role of the Reserve Bank during wave 1 and the whole previous year. I think they've done sterling and exemplary. I was doing a comparative study for ERIA on various and also for United Nations ASCAP. And I was looking at what other central banks have done and what RBI has done absolutely on the forefront. They've done an exceedingly good job. The thought of strengthening the ARCs and positioning them now, which the RBI is thinking, I think is also very contemporary and timely, and also thinking of a bad bank and bringing it so that the banking and financial sector takes benefit of it. I'm aware Mr. Raman Agarwal would feel that while the banking industry is leaping forward with all these benefits and the lender of last resort is helping them, NBFCs are somehow losing in the race. That is true. About 13% of the Indian financial sector is contributed by NBFCs, vis-a-vis 50% in the USA. And I think NBFC sector has to work a little more harder, solidify their research, make it so that research-based recommendations emerge. The Reserve Bank then, I guess, would probably pay more heed if research-based, even if they're case-based studies, and they bring out what is happening in different sectors. The Reserve Bank on its own has done exceedingly well on HFCs, which is part of NBFCs, has also done exceedingly well on gold and jewelry loans, which are again part of NBFCs. So you're right, we need a sectoral approach, which I think we need to provide inputs to the Reserve Bank. With this, let me thank each one of you for participating and staying with us during the course of this discussion and contributing in so many ways. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you to all, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
you.